For the first time in 10 years, American officials sat down with Cuban officials in Havana, secretly, and Washington is now officially denying it ever happened. That tells you everything you need to know about where American foreign policy is right now, conducting diplomacy in the dark while publicly pretending nothing is changing. This week, the United States is doing things it said it would never do, with countries it said it would never talk to for reasons it refuses to explain. And the thread connecting all of it is simple. The empire is overstretched, the alliances are fraying, and desperation is starting to look like strategy. Let us start with Cuba, because what happened this week in Havana is genuinely extraordinary. American and Cuban officials held secret negotiations, the first direct diplomatic contact between the two governments in a decade. The last time Washington and Havana were actually talking was under the Obama-era normalization process, which Trump rolled back in his first term and never fully reversed. Now, in the middle of his second term, secret talks are happening again. Why? Cuba is collapsing. Not metaphorically, literally. The electricity grid has been failing for over a year. Fuel shortages are endemic. Food prices have spiraled beyond what most Cubans can afford. There are regular blackouts lasting 10 to 20 hours. The government has lost control of basic service delivery, and people are leaving in the largest wave of emigration the island has seen in generations. More Cubans are crossing into the United States now than at almost any point in the past 30 years. That last fact is what matters for Washington. When Cuba collapses, the migration surge does not stay in the Caribbean. It arrives in Florida. It becomes a domestic political crisis, and the Trump administration, which built its entire political identity around controlling the southern border, cannot afford a televised crisis of Cuban boats arriving in Miami, just as it is claiming victory on immigration. So they are talking, quietly, in Havana, and denying it publicly because admitting to talks with Cuba would infuriate the Cuban-American hardline base in Florida that has been essential to Republican electoral math for 40 years. The negotiations, according to the few details that have leaked, focused on migration management and the return of Cuban nationals who have been ordered deported from the United States. Neither side confirmed topics. Neither side acknowledged the meeting happened through official channels. The White House response, when asked directly, was a flat denial. That is the signature move of this era of American diplomacy. Do the thing, deny the thing, continue doing the thing. This is the strange corner American foreign policy has painted itself into. The policy publicly demands maximum pressure. The reality quietly demands crisis management. And the gap between those two positions is now wide enough to hold secret diplomatic negotiations in. Meanwhile, the other pressure cooker in American foreign policy cracked open this week: Iran. Specifically, the political structure inside Iran is showing signs of serious fracture. The Iranian Navy Secretary resigned this week in circumstances that are anything but routine. This was not a standard departure. It came in the immediate aftermath of collapsed negotiations with the United States, and it signals a deeper split inside the Iranian system about how to handle the American pressure campaign. On one side, you have figures who believe Iran can negotiate from strength and extract concessions by maintaining nuclear ambiguity while talking. On the other side, you have hardliners who believe any engagement with Washington is capitulation and that resistance is the only viable strategy. The Navy Secretary's resignation appears to be one casualty of that internal battle. When the moderates lose enough ground, the hardliners purge. And the fourth round of nuclear talks that was supposed to happen this week in Oman? Postponed. No explanation given. Publicly, both sides claim scheduling issues. In reality, Iran is in the middle of an internal political realignment, and nobody in Tehran is authorized to make commitments right now because nobody is sure who will be in charge of the decision next month. For the United States, this is both a problem and a strange kind of leverage. A fragmented Iranian government cannot sign a deal, but it also cannot launch a coherent military escalation. So the Trump administration has done something tactically clever and strategically ambiguous. It has extended the ceasefire with Iran indefinitely. Not a deal, not a normalization, just a freeze. Keep the temperature low while the other side reorganizes itself. It costs nothing, it risks nothing, and it preserves options. It is the diplomatic equivalent of waiting in the parking lot to see which way the traffic goes. Now about Trump and his own coalition, because while he is conducting this careful foreign policy navigation abroad, things are getting genuinely unstable at home. This week, Republican congressional support for the Trump agenda has dropped in a way that pollsters and strategists are describing as statistically significant. It is not a collapse, but it is a crack, and it is coming from multiple directions simultaneously. The Pentagon scandal is one source. The Navy Secretary resigned not just over Iran, but over a broader pattern of chaos in Defense Department management. The signal fires from inside the building have been burning for weeks, and now they are visible enough that Republican lawmakers who need to run in 2026 midterms are beginning to calculate whether unconditional loyalty to Trump is still the winning position in their districts. The Putin factor is another. American intelligence analysts have spent this week briefing congressional offices on something that most of them already suspected. Russia is deliberately stalling the peace process. Vladimir Putin is dragging out the timeline not because he lacks options, but because delay is itself a strategy. Every week of continued fighting is another week of Ukrainian infrastructure damage, another week of Western attention fatigue, another week of Trump looking like the peace president who cannot actually deliver peace. And Trump's Republican critics are starting to use that against him, not loudly, not in public floor speeches, but in private conversations with reporters and in the kind of language that shows up in anonymous quotes. The word embarrassing has been used, the word stalled has been used, and that is the beginning of a political problem. Tucker Carlson added another strange chapter to this week's story. He traveled to Europe and delivered what can only be described as an apology tour on behalf of Donald Trump. He met with European leaders and told them essentially that Trump's rhetoric is not American foreign policy and that the alliance remains intact underneath the noise. It is an unusual diplomatic role for a television host with no official standing, but it reflects something real. The actual diplomats and foreign policy professionals inside this administration are apparently either unable or unwilling to do this kind of reassurance work, so a media personality is doing it instead. European leaders received him politely and said nothing of substance in response, which is itself a statement. When a television host has to fly to Europe to reassure allied governments that the United States has not abandoned them, the alliance is already in a different place than it was 5 years ago. Whether that place is sustainable is the question nobody in Washington wants to answer out loud. What connects all of these stories is not chaos. It is something more structured than chaos. It is an administration that has decided that orthodox foreign policy is too slow, too public, and too accountable for what it actually needs to accomplish. Secret Cuba talks, an indefinite Iranian freeze without a formal agreement, an unofficial Tucker Carlson reassurance mission to NATO capitals, a deliberate strategic ambiguity with Russia that lets Trump claim credit for anything good while blaming delay on Kiev or Zelensky. The system is working if you define working as keeping crises from becoming catastrophes. The question is whether it is building anything durable. Secret talks eventually become either real diplomacy or open failures. Freezes eventually thaw. Fragile coalitions eventually fracture further. Cuba is a good test case. The secret talks happened. They were real. But the policy publicly remains unchanged. Sanctions, embargo, maximum pressure. Until the public position and the private reality are aligned, nothing can actually be resolved. And in Washington right now, the gap between what is said and what is done is the widest it has been in decades. That gap is where foreign policy goes to get complicated. And this week, it got very complicated indeed. I am Andrew Meatrich. This was your weekly American Situation Report. The next episode will be out in a few days. Subscribe if you want to keep up with what Washington is actually doing, not just what it is saying.